They didn't just cross a line, they bulldozed over it. And they thought they could get away with it because they wore cheap badges and held clipboards like they were some kind of authority. I've seen real authority. I've served under it, fought beside it, and earned mine in places they couldn't even imagine. But this was personal. It started just like any other Tuesday. My wife and I were enjoying coffee on the porch of our home, a modest place tucked at the end of a cul-de-sac, far away from noise, conflict, or so we thought. She was planting flowers in the yard, laughing about how the birds always knocked over her garden gnome. We'd worked hard for this piece. We earned it. Every nail in the deck, every brick in the walkway, every bill paid on time. No drama, no noise, just calm. Then the white truck rolled in. The HOA enforcers, 3 of them, climbed out like they owned the street, clipboards in hand, matching polos, sunglasses. You know the type. They didn't wave, didn't greet us, just stomped right across the lawn, flattening the edge of the flower bed my wife had just cleaned. She stood up, dirt on her gloves, surprised more than anything. The guy in front, stocky, red-faced, thick neck, pointed at our mailbox. "That's not regulation height," he barked. My wife smiled, polite as ever. It's been like that for years. Nobody said anything. "New guidelines," he grunted. "You were sent a notice." "No," she said gently. "We didn't get anything." That's when his buddy chimed in, walking around her like she was invisible. "You've also got unauthorized garden decor. That gnome violates community standards." I stood up slowly, still holding my coffee, still calm. I hadn't said a word yet. Not because I was afraid, because I was watching, assessing. That old training never leaves you. She looked confused. "It's a gnome." He shrugged. "Rules are rules." Then the third one, the youngest, said something I'll never forget. He chuckled and said, "Lady, you can smile all you want, but if we don't like it, it goes." That was enough for me. I walked down the steps and stood beside her. "Is there a real issue here, or are you just trying to pick a fight?" The lead guy turned to me, puffing out his chest. "Are you threatening us?" I didn't flinch. I asked a question. He didn't like that. People like him never do. He stepped forward like he was going to intimidate me. Wrong move. My body stayed relaxed. I didn't square up, just stood there. Then he did it. He shoved past me to grab the gnome. My wife stepped between them, reaching out to stop him. "Please don't touch our stuff." And that's when it happened. He swung. He didn't think, didn't hold back. Just punched her right there in the garden, knocking her down into the flowers she planted that morning. There was a moment of silence. Even the birds stopped. She gasped, grabbing her cheek, shocked, in pain. I looked at her, then at him, and I changed. Everything I was holding back, every instinct I trained to control, rushed forward, but not like they expected, not with wild fists or yelling. No, I stepped in close, calm, and told him exactly what he needed to hear. "You just hit a Navy SEAL's wife." He didn't even apologize. That was the first thing that struck me. Not the punch, not the sound of my wife hitting the ground, but the way he stood there, arms slightly out, chest puffed, like he was daring someone to say something. His eyes darted between me and the other 2, searching for backup, but they weren't moving. One looked down at the grass. The other shifted his weight, like he suddenly realized he wasn't wearing body armor. I helped my wife sit up. Her cheek was already swelling, a red mark rising under the skin. She blinked fast, tried to stay composed, but I saw her hands tremble. I'd seen that look before, when adrenaline takes over and the mind hasn't caught up yet. She wasn't scared. She was stunned. And she was trying to understand how a stranger had just hit her in her own yard, in broad daylight, over a gnome. The man who hit her tried to speak, but all that came out was, "She grabbed me first." I looked him dead in the eyes. "No, she stopped you from stealing." He turned redder. "We're allowed to remove violations. You're allowed to send letters, not throw punches." Behind him, the youngest one finally spoke. "We should call someone." That's when I knew they didn't get it. They still thought they had control, still believed their little HOA roles gave them power. I could have dismantled them right then, physically and legally, but I didn't. That's not how I work. That's not what real strength is. Real strength is knowing exactly what you're capable of and choosing restraint. But that didn't mean I'd let it slide. I helped my wife to her feet. She nodded at me, still silent. We walked past the men, back to the porch. I took out my phone, called the sheriff's department directly. Number 911. I had the number saved from when I was helping the local veteran outreach program. Told them what happened in plain words. 3 HOA enforcers entered my property without notice. One of them physically assaulted my wife. We're safe, but we'll need an officer and a report. The dispatcher said they'd send someone right away. I thanked her and hung up. Back on the lawn, the men were talking quietly, hands moving, heads turning toward the truck. One of them said, "We should leave." But I didn't let them. "Don't go anywhere," I said. "The police will want to speak with you." They hesitated. The leader, the one who hit her, looked around like he was weighing his options. I knew that looked too well, fight or flight. He'd picked the wrong fight, and now he had nowhere to run. "You don't understand," he said. "We're just trying to keep the community in order." I walked down the steps again, slow and steady. "That's not order. That's assault, and you're going to answer for it." He opened his mouth, then shut it. No more arguments. No more bravado. Just a man who finally realized his clipboard didn't shield him from consequences. A few minutes passed in silence. My wife stood beside me, arms folded tightly, the swelling on her cheek more visible now. But her eyes, those were sharp again. Focused. She'd been through worse with me. Stood by me during deployments. Waited through months of silence. This was ugly, yes, but it wasn't going to break her. When the cruiser rolled up, lights flashing but no siren, the 3 men turned stiff. The deputy stepped out, tall guy, gray at the temples, with a look that said he didn't have time for nonsense. He saw my wife's face, then looked at the men standing in the yard. He didn't ask who was in charge. He walked straight up to me. "Mister?" I nodded and gave him my name. He looked me up and down, noticed the way I stood. Maybe he recognized something. Maybe not, but his voice lowered just a bit. "Tell me what happened." I did. Every word. Clear, calm, just like I was trained. And when I finished, he looked at the HOA men, narrowed his eyes, and said, "You all better hope there's no video, because if there is, we're going to need it." That's when they really started sweating. One of the enforcers tried to cut in, too late. "We were enforcing HOA policy," he said quickly, like it might erase what had already happened. "The gnome wasn't approved, the mailbox was too low, and we warned them." The deputy held up a hand, just enough to shut him down. "Let's stick to the part where your buddy struck a resident. Everything else can wait." You could see the panic start to settle in. Clipboard rules weren't going to help now. My wife stood firm, watching quietly, but her eyes didn't blink much. She wanted this handled properly. So did I, not just because of the punch, but because of what it meant. People in fake authority uniforms thinking they can bulldoze over anyone who doesn't obey fast enough. I've seen what happens when that kind of mindset goes unchecked. This wasn't going to be one of those times. The deputy took notes, asked for ID, and then turned toward the HOA leader, the same man who hit my wife. He was sweating now, visibly shaking, his mouth clenching every few seconds like he was trying to form a defense. But there wasn't one. You don't get to punch a woman because she stopped you from stealing her lawn decor. Then the officer asked a question that made all 3 of them stiffen. "Is there body cam or phone footage of the incident from any of you?" They didn't answer right away. That silence was its own answer. The officer scanned the lawn, then pointed to a small camera mounted on my porch. "That recording work?" I nodded. Motion activated. Captures both sound and video. He smiled faintly. "Good. I'll need a copy." The enforcers knew then they weren't talking their way out. Not this time. Not with a real authority figure present. Not with proof. As the deputy kept asking questions, I stepped back toward the porch. I needed to make sure the footage was downloaded, saved, and backed up. I've been in enough hostile situations to know. If it's not on video, it's your word versus theirs. And people in uniforms, whether real or fake, often get away with far more than they should. Inside, the security systems app loaded on my tablet. I pulled up the footage, watched the moment again, my wife reaching for the gnome, his arm swinging. It turned my stomach even more watching it as a bystander. You could see how casual it looked for him, like hitting someone was just part of enforcing a policy. That, more than the act itself, made me feel cold. I downloaded the file and emailed it directly to the sheriff's office. When I stepped back outside, the deputy was already separating them. One guy in the truck, one leaning on the fender. The third, the one who hit her, was sitting on the grass, head in his hands. The deputy walked over when he saw me return. Thanks for the video. That's going to help a lot. He paused. Do you want to press charges? I looked at my wife. She nodded once. Yes, I said. The officer nodded too. All right, he'll be coming with me today. The two remaining enforcers started talking fast about how they didn't know he'd do that, how they didn't support it, how they thought this was just going to be a citation visit. One of them actually said, "We're just volunteers, man." Volunteers or not, I didn't care. You show up on someone's property, bark orders, lay hands on people, you get treated like a criminal, because that's exactly what you are. Doesn't matter what your shirt says. The officer returned to the cruiser, placed a man in cuffs without much struggle, and radioed for transport. My wife and I stood together silently. Her cheek had darkened into a bruise now. She still hadn't cried. She wasn't the crying type. She'd grown up with a father who served too. Strength was in her blood, same as mine. But in that moment, I realized this whole thing had gone deeper than I thought. The HOA wasn't just a nuisance anymore. They'd gotten comfortable stepping over boundaries, comfortable ignoring rights, comfortable with intimidation. And this was just a result of what happens when you let petty power go unchecked for too long. It didn't take long for word to spread. By the next morning, half the neighborhood had heard about what happened. We weren't the kind of people who stirred up drama, and everyone knew it. That's probably why it hit harder. Quiet couple at the end of the street. Always polite. Never caused trouble. Now suddenly, one of us had a black and blue cheek, and a police cruiser had taken an HOA enforcer away in cuffs. A neighbor across the street, old guy named Tom, knocked on our door with a mug of hot coffee and asked if we were okay. My wife smiled gently, even with the swelling, and thanked him. He looked like he didn't know what to say. Never seen anything like it, he mumbled. Didn't think they'd go that far. Neither did we. But here we were. By noon, we got an email from the HOA board. Not an apology. Not even a proper acknowledgement. Just a cold, templated message about unfortunate events and pending internal investigation. They mentioned enforcers were acting independently, even though we all knew they were just doing what the board encouraged, harassing people over nonsense to make themselves feel important. I didn't reply. Not yet. Instead, I dug through my files. I still had the handbook they dropped off when we moved in, the one with all the rules and bylaws. Most people throw that thing in a drawer and forget it exists, but I'd actually read it once. And now, I started highlighting every violation they committed, not just from the assault, but from the trespassing, threats, intimidation, and the lack of prior notice. They hadn't followed a single proper protocol. It was a disaster disguised as enforcement. Then I made a call, not to the sheriff this time, but to an attorney I'd met through veteran legal outreach. Good man. No nonsense. I told him what happened. I told him we had video, witnesses, written records, and bruises to show for it. He listened quietly, then said, "We're not just pressing charges. We're pressing the whole board." That's when the real plan began. It's easy to think justice happens all at once, in some big dramatic moment. But the truth is, it builds, slow and quiet like a storm just over the ridge. You feel it before you see it. And the board? They didn't feel it coming. They thought they could do damage control with a newsletter and a fake smile at the next monthly meeting. They had no clue I'd already filed formal complaints with the county. No idea I was organizing every resident who'd ever been threatened, fined, or harassed. Turns out, I wasn't the only one with stories. One family got fined for chalk art on their sidewalk. Another was cited for having a backyard birthday party that violated noise policy at 6 p.m. on a Saturday. It wasn't about rules. It was about control. The more I listened, the more I realized how long this had been building. The HOA had grown too comfortable, too bold. Nobody pushed back, so they kept pushing forward, thinking they were invincible. They weren't. A week later, the man who hit my wife was officially charged with assault. Misdemeanor for now, but enough to make headlines in our local news. That's when the board started scrambling. One of them even dropped by our house. Suit jacket over jeans, fake grin on his face. He didn't get past the driveway. I stepped out and stood between him and the porch. If you're here to apologize, put in writing. I just wanted to clear the air, he said, hands out like I was supposed to let him in. I shook my head. You didn't try to clear anything when you let your people walk onto my property uninvited. You didn't clear anything when your team hit my wife. He tried to talk again, but I stopped him with a question. You ever serve? He blinked. No, I did, I said. 20 years. And I didn't fight so people like you could push families around with made-up rules and unchecked power. He left without another word. And that's when I realized something else. These people only understand two things, silence and strength. I'd given them silence for years. Now, they were about to see the other side. A few days after that tense driveway encounter, I got a letter. It wasn't from the HOA board this time. It came directly from their legal department. Some outside firm they clearly hired to look intimidating. The letter was filled with big words and empty threats. Defamatory behavior. Unlawful disruption of HOA procedures. Potential breach of community code. They tried to flip the script, make it sound like I was the problem. Like my wife getting punched was an inconvenience for them. I didn't even flinch. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I've spent my life reading more dangerous paperwork than that. Orders that put people in harm's way. This was nothing but weak attempts at control, hidden behind letterhead. I scanned the letter and forwarded it straight to my attorney. He read it and laughed. Good. That means they're rattled. That same night, we held a quiet meeting at my house. Just neighbors. No signs. No shouting. Just people who were tired of being walked on. I expected maybe 4 or 5 to show up. 17 came. Some brought printouts of fines. Others brought pictures of violations that made no sense. One woman had been fined $200 for having a faded welcome mat. Another man said they threatened him over the color of his patio chairs. We sat around my kitchen table, trading stories like soldiers swapping intel. The deeper we went, the clearer the pattern became. This wasn't about keeping the neighborhood clean. It was about power, money, and fear. They fined people who didn't argue. They harassed the quiet ones. They counted on most folks being too busy or too intimidated to fight back. But something had changed. I had changed it. They messed with the wrong family. One neighbor, a single mom named Julia, showed us a list of fines she paid over the past year. Over $1, $500 total. All tiny things. Toys left on the front lawn. Her son's bike leaned against the porch, a flag that wasn't HOA approved. She looked at me with tired eyes and asked, "Do we even have a say anymore?" That hit me. These weren't just rules. This was a system built on silence. People who couldn't afford to push back, who didn't know how, or who felt like they were the only ones being targeted. Until now, I stood up, pulled out a folder, and laid it flat on the table. I've already started building a case. I told them everything they've done wrong, every time they've overstepped. And I'm not just fighting back for me. I'm fighting for all of us. For the first time in that meeting, the room went quiet. Then one guy leaned forward, smiling. "You really were a SEAL, huh?" I nodded. Still am in a way. Just a different battlefield now. We made a plan that night. Started collecting documents. Photos. Letters. Every paper trail we could find. I created a shared folder online where anyone could drop in proof. By morning, we had over 50 files. And that was just the beginning. Later that week, the HOA held an emergency board meeting. Normally, only a few people show up. This time, the room was packed. Standing room only. And everyone was quiet, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was something else. Something steady, like the first breath before a storm. The board members looked shaken. For the first time in years, they were outnumbered. They tried to open the meeting with their usual script, but people started asking questions. Tough ones, real ones, and they didn't have answers. They weren't used to pushback. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I simply walked to front, held up a photo of my wife's bruised face, and asked one question. Is this what community looks like to you? You could hear a pin drop. They didn't respond. Not one of them. And that silence, that was the first honest thing they'd given us in a long time. What they didn't know is, while they were trying to intimidate us with letters and fake policies, we were building something stronger, something they couldn't find, silence, or erase. We were done being quiet, and the foundation they thought was rock solid, it had already started to crack. The morning after the board meeting, I woke up to a noise I hadn't heard in a long time. Silence. Not the peaceful kind. The suspicious kind. The kind that makes you feel like something is happening, but no one wants to say out loud. My phone buzzed. First one text, then another. By the third, I knew something was up. A neighbor sent me a photo. Then another. Then came the video. It was the HOA truck, same white one from before, driving slowly down our street around 5 a.m. No warning. No notices. Just one of the board members and a different group of so-called compliance officers walking up to homes with flashlights and clipboards. They were taking pictures, measuring mailbox heights, checking paint colors in the dim morning light. No knocking, no permission, just a quiet scan of every single house. They were trying to send a message. I got dressed and stepped outside. Sure enough, they were 2 doors down, shining lights at someone's porch. I walked straight toward them. The lead guy, younger, maybe late 30s, tried to block my path. "You're interfering with a compliance check," he said flatly. I looked him in the eye. At 5 in the morning? No warning? No courtesy? He shrugged. "We're allowed to inspect common areas and visible property." I took a slow breath. "And you think trespassing before sunrise counts as proper inspection?" He blinked but didn't respond. Just wrote something on his clipboard and turned away. I pulled out my phone and started filming. "You're being recorded. This entire neighborhood has cameras now, and everyone's watching." He didn't look back, but I noticed his hand tremble slightly as he clipped the pen back onto his pocket. By the time they got back in their truck and left, over 20 residents had come outside, pajamas, robes, coffee mugs in hand. Nobody spoke at first. They didn't have to. We were all thinking the same thing. This wasn't compliance. It was retaliation. But they'd made their biggest mistake yet. That same afternoon, I submitted a formal complaint to the city's housing authority, not just for harassment, but for targeted enforcement abuse, unlawful early inspections, and repeated attempts to intimidate residents. I didn't just use my name. I included the names of 10 other families who had signed off in support. Every one of them had experienced the same early morning nonsense. Then I went one step further. I reached out to a local news station. Not the flashy, loud kind. Just a small but respected community outlet. I sent them the footage, the photos, the police report from when my wife was assaulted, the HOA letters, everything. I didn't ask for a dramatic story. Just facts. 2 days later, the segment aired. They didn't use our names. No faces shown. But the story was clear. Neighborhood HOA accused of harassment, physical assault, and illegal inspections. They played the footage of the early morning truck, read part of the complaint, and showed the community coming together. It hit harder than I expected. The next HOA meeting was different. No long table. No smirking board members. 3 of them didn't show up. 2 had resigned the night before, citing personal reasons. The third was on leave. The guy who hit my wife? Still facing charges. The lawyer who sent me the threatening letter? Gone. Dropped the HOA as a client. But the most surprising part? People started to speak up, not just at meetings, but everywhere. Neighbors who'd never said more than good morning were now talking, sharing, organizing. Someone set up a group chat. Another started researching bylaws. Someone else called for a vote to replace the board entirely. It was like something had snapped loose. That quiet fear that kept people obedient, it was gone. And through all of it, my wife stayed strong. The bruise had faded, but the fire in her eyes hadn't. She was the one who suggested we print out copies of the community charter and hand them out at the next meeting. So we did, one for every household. They thought they could scare us back into silence. But instead, they reminded us who this neighborhood really belongs to. Not them, not their rules. Us, the people who live here, who care about each other, who are done being bullied. And they had no idea what was coming next. The vote didn't happen overnight. It started with whispers, neighbors talking in driveways, on sidewalks, over fences. People who had never even looked each other in the eye were suddenly allies. Something had shifted. The fear was gone, replaced by something else. Something sharper. Determination. We didn't storm into it. No angry mobs. No shouting matches. Just quiet steps, gathering signatures, reviewing the bylaws, doing it by the book. Every time someone asked, "Can we actually remove the board?" the answer was the same. Yes. And we will. The rules were clear, buried deep in the HOA handbook most of us had ignored for years. If 30% of homeowners submitted a recall petition, the board would be required to hold a vote. No loopholes. No wiggle room. And the best part? We already had over half the neighborhood on our side. People were tired. Tired of being treated like children in their own homes. Tired of the bullying disguised as policy. Tired of walking on eggshells over paint colors and potted plants. The more we pushed, the more desperate the board got. First came the emails, long, rambling, full of excuses. Then came the flyers, slid under our doors. Warnings about outsiders trying to destabilize the community. They tried to paint us as troublemakers, using fear the way they always had. But no one was buying it anymore. They even tried to call an emergency rule change, something about limiting who could initiate petitions. That backfired. One of the residents, a retired paralegal, stood up and calmly explained that changing rules mid-process violated HOA policy and state law. The board sat there red-faced and silent. They knew, the moment we hit the required number of signatures, we filed a petition in person. No emails, no soft delivery. We walked into their office with a box, handed it over and left. Nothing more needed to be said. The vote was scheduled 2 weeks later. In the days leading up to it, we kept the pressure up, not by yelling, but by organizing. We created printed summaries of board violations, mailed them to every resident. We hosted small backyard meetings. We reminded people this wasn't just about one punch, one family, or one rule. It was about the way we had all been treated. And when the day came, it was unlike anything this neighborhood had ever seen. The community center was packed. Standing room only. Elderly couples. Single moms. Veterans. New homeowners. All of them there because they were done. Done being quiet. Done accepting fear as normal. Each board member had a chance to speak. Some tried to defend their actions. Others stayed silent, eyes down, hands folded. A few looked like they wanted to be anywhere else but there. Then we spoke. Not just me, my wife, Julia, Tom, the couple with the birthday party fine, the guy with the chalk art citation. Person after person stood and told their story. No yelling, just truth. When it was time to vote, the silence was heavy. You could feel hearts beating in the room. Ballots were marked, folded, dropped in the box. And then we waited. An hour passed. Then another. No one left. No one spoke. When the results were read aloud, no one cheered. No one clapped. Because we didn't need to. All 5 board members. Removed. Unanimous. The silence in that room wasn't shock. It was relief. A quiet, steady realization that the weight we'd all been carrying had finally been lifted. As we walked out, my wife squeezed my hand. I looked over at her, and she smiled, the kind of smile I hadn't seen in weeks. Not because we won, but because we'd taken back something they tried to steal from us. Not our lawn gnomes, not our mailbox measurements, our voice, our respect, our peace. And for the first time in a long time, it felt like home again. The neighborhood didn't change overnight, but something deep beneath the surface had shifted. It was in the way people walked now, heads higher, back straighter. You could see it in the little things. A flag someone hung proudly on their porch that wasn't on any approved list. Sidewalk hawk sketches returned to driveways. A kid's bike leaning against a fence without anyone worrying about a fine. The silence that had ruled for so long had been broken, and it wasn't because of rage or revenge. It was because enough was finally enough. The newly elected board wasn't made up of loud people or polished talkers. It was made up of listeners, of doers, of people who had lived here, been pushed around, and decided to step up. They didn't promise to fix everything in a day. They just promised to be fair. And for most of us, that was more than enough. For weeks after the vote, neighbors kept coming by our house, dropping off baked goods, thank you notes, even small handmade gifts. One guy left a little wooden carving of a Navy SEAL trident in our mailbox and signed, just a quiet sign of respect. My wife cried when she saw it, and not because of what had happened, but because of what came after, what we'd built together. The same enforcers who used to patrol the streets like they owned them, they disappeared. No more clipboards. No more surprise visits. No more threats scribbled in red ink. Their titles had been stripped. Their authority revoked. Funny thing was, the neighborhood didn't fall apart. Grass still got mowed. Trash bins still came in on time. Kids still played ball in the cul-de-sacs. In fact, things felt lighter, like everyone could finally breathe. One morning, I got up early, same as always, and made coffee on the porch. My wife joined me with her favorite mug. The bruise was long gone, but every time I looked at her, I remembered what started it all. She saw me watching her and smiled. Would you do it all again? I didn't even have to think. Twice if I had to, because that's the truth. This wasn't just about an HOA. It wasn't just about some overpaid volunteer throwing punches or board members hiding behind fine print. It was about something bigger. Standing your ground, protecting your own, refusing to let fear rule the place you're supposed to call home. They thought I'd get angry and fight with fists, but the real fight was never about who could hit harder. It was about who could hold the line the longest, who could stand calm in the middle of chaos and say, no more. I didn't need to raise my voice. I didn't need to make threats. I just needed to stand up. And sometimes, that's enough to tip everything. The story spread far beyond our cul-de-sac. A few local papers picked it up. Some folks from nearby neighborhoods reached out, asking how we did it. I told them the same thing every time. Get organized. Know the